Guards, leave us.
With those simple words, Emperor Palpatine dismissed his royal guards from the throne room, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that it would be the final command they would hear from the Dark Master they'd sworn to protect. Conditioned to obey without question, they retreated from the conflict that would define the galaxy's fate. And as they stood outside, listening to the faint sounds of battle within, these crimson-clad sentinels were left with only their duty, unaware of the tragedy that awaited both them and their empire. The Emperor's royal guard were more than soldiers. They were symbols, crimson shadows ever present behind the Dark Lord of the Sith, unfaltering in their silence and loyalty. Rarely speaking, rarely seen in action, the guard's mystery was rivaled only by the power they protected. For years, they had been forged into weapons of Palpatine's will, embodying the quiet, menacing strength of the Empire itself. Yet a deeper irony lies buried in their silence. While they were guardians of the galaxy's most powerful figure, their lives were not their own. Trained in ancient martial arts like Ichani and armed with force pikes capable of piercing armor, the guards were unmatched warriors, but this strength served only to reinforce their dependence. Their purpose, absolute obedience, meant they had sacrificed their identities, becoming faceless figures bound to the Emperor's every whim, and in their silence, they became echoes of Palpatine's own isolation. The origins of the Royal Guards trace back to the Republic's twilight during the Separatist crisis. As Supreme Chancellor Palpatine introduced an elite force under the guise of the Red Guard, protectors seemingly devoted to the Republic, but in truth loyal only to him. Selected from the most skilled soldiers in the galaxy, they were trained with ruthless intensity. Only those willing to forsake ambition, friendship, and personal desires emerged from this crucible to don the crimson armor. By the time the Republic fell and the Empire rose, the Red Guard had evolved into the Emperor's Royal Guard, a force conditioned for absolute loyalty, bound not to protect a government or even an empire, but one man's power. And in this transformation, their fate was sealed. The guards, now isolated from all but the Emperor, reflected his own withdrawal from the galaxy, mirroring the shadow of control that he cast over the Empire. What set the Royal Guards apart was more than training. It was the influence of Sith ideology, seeping into every layer of their existence. Palpatine, drawing from ancient Sith practices, selected soldiers not only for their strength, but for their susceptibility to conditioning, reinforcing their loyalty with a kind of twisted alchemy of loyalty and fear. In this way, the guards became something akin to Sith acolytes, programmed to defend and, if necessary, to die for their Emperor. Yet unlike Sith apprentices, they had no access to power or autonomy. They were bound to serve, stripped of personal legacy, transformed into extensions of the Emperor's will. This influence didn't make them Sith, but it did forge them into something beyond ordinary soldiers. The power of the dark side subtly permeated their ranks, bending them toward unyielding devotion and an almost supernatural resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Unlike the Jedi Temple Guards, who wielded the light in service of justice, the Royal Guards wielded loyalty as a weapon, a loyalty darkened by the shadow of the Sith and sharpened into a single-minded focus. Once Emperor, Palpatine rarely appeared before his people, and when he did, it was as a distant, almost mythic figure shrouded in darkness. The Royal Guards, with their imposing presence, became an extension of this isolation. Their red cloaks were a constant reminder of the Emperor's hidden power, and their unwavering silence added to the sense of distance he created between himself and the galaxy. Where Palpatine went, they followed, never speaking, never questioning, an indelible part of his mythos. In standing beside him, they became symbols of the Empire's merciless power, their red armor as iconic as it was isolating. To the galaxy, they were little more than mysterious phantoms. To themselves, they were soldiers bound by loyalty that had long since cost them their freedom. In their purpose, the Royal Guards echoed the fate of the clone troopers, soldiers also created to serve Palpatine's vision and discarded when they were no longer needed. While the clones were bred in a laboratory, the Royal Guards were molded by a different psychological kind of manipulation. Just as the clones were programmed with obedience, the guards were trained to submerge their identity, to act as an extension of Palpatine's desires without question or hesitation. Yet unlike the clones, the Royal Guards had chosen this path, or perhaps they had been chosen for it. They were not made, but transformed, stripped of identity as effectively as if they had been grown in a test tube. In a galaxy of Force-sensitive acolytes and genetically programmed warriors, the Royal Guards existed in a strange purgatory, halfway between autonomy and control. This gave them a tragic depth, a parallel yet distinct echo of the clones' blind devotion to a purpose that was never truly theirs. In the end, it was their loyalty that betrayed them. The Royal Guard served a man who understood deception better than anyone. He had ascended to power through manipulation, yet his guards remained blissfully unaware of the darker truths. They were loyal to an image, an emperor they saw as invincible. In their dedication, they became tools, living embodiments of his will, oblivious to the greater designs that he kept even from them. Consider the layers of tragedy here. Palpatine's guards stood ready to protect their emperor, yet they were intentionally kept at a distance, unaware of his true goals. They existed as a safeguard against any threat to his power, and yet they too were expendable. For all their training and skill, they were shields rather than warriors, created not to question, but to obey. The climax of this tragedy unfolded in the Emperor's final moments. Dismissing his guards from the throne room on the second Death Star, Palpatine sealed their fate. As the sounds of conflict echoed beyond the doors, the guards were left to wonder, not to act. They had dedicated their lives to this moment, yet they were cast aside. Outside the room, as the battle intensified, a creeping sense of dread began to unsettle them, but loyalty, ingrained over years of obedience, won out. They did not intervene. When Darth Vader emerged from the throne room, gravely injured, and Luke Skywalker with him, the truth became clear. The guards who had once trusted in Palpatine's supposed invincibility were left with only the silence of betrayal. Their emperor, the man for whom they had given everything, was dead, and with him went the purpose of their lives. For those who survived the Empire's collapse, the aftermath was a void. Their identity, once tied to the Emperor, had evaporated, leaving them as relics of a forgotten era. Some clung to the remnants of the Empire, still bound by a loyalty to an idea that had disintegrated with the Death Star. Others were left to contemplate the emptiness of a life given to a master who had always kept them in the shadows. In time, new empires would rise and crimson-clad guards would return, most notably in the form of the Praetorian Guard, fashioned after the Emperor's Royal Guard by the First Order. But these guards, trained in ritual and combat, lacked the tragic depth of their predecessors. They were fighters, not shadows. Their loyalty was functional, not fanatical, a pale imitation of the original Royal Guard's devotion. In the end, the Emperor's Royal Guard stand as a symbol of the dangers of absolute loyalty. Their story is one of devotion given freely, yet unrequited. Bound to a master who valued them only as tools, they were denied any closure, any purpose beyond his existence. Their crimson armor, once a mark of prestige, became a symbol of their entrapment, and when the Emperor fell, they were left with nothing but the haunting realization of lives spent in the service of a lie. And so the story of the Emperor's Royal Guard serves as a grim reminder of the price of blind loyalty. Tell us if you think they were simply soldiers fulfilling their duty, or tragic figures lost to a devotion they could not escape. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may the dark side be with you.